What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another edition of Pistons Daily, where you can find daily content covering all things Detroit Pistons all year long. I'm your host. My name is Kyle Garrison. I'm over on Twitter at Kyle Garrison2, where I talk all things Detroit sports. So come on over, say hello, give me comments, questions, concerns, episode ideas. I'd love to hear from you guys. With that being said, let's jump right into today's video. So the first thing I want to talk about is a potential trade-up scenario for the Pistons coming up on Wednesday night's draft. And then I want to dive into an evaluation of Isaiah Stewart's fifth year in the league, kind of similar to what I did with Asar Thompson yesterday. Just talk about what Stewart did well, what didn't go well, and how he fits into this young core going forward. And then I want to dive into a potential sign-and-trade scenario with the Dallas Mavericks centered around PJ Washington. And finally, Kevin Durant was just traded to the Houston Rockets. I'm recording this on Sunday, June 22nd, and that trade just went down a few hours ago, so I'll give my thoughts on that. But first things first, let's talk about trading up in this year's draft. So obviously this year's draft is on June 25th on Wednesday. The Pistons sit at the 37th pick, but what I've heard is that this second round is a little bit weaker than years past just because with NIL, college players are much more likely to stay at school, and that was the case. So the second round of the draft has a lot less freshmen, sophomore, young prospects, and it's a lot of older prospects that are much closer to their ceiling than in years past. So I think the Pistons would be wise to try and even move up into the 20 to 30 range. They have 7 combined second rounders in the 2027 and 2028 drafts. So if you attach one of your 2027 second rounders to your current 37th pick, you could probably get a deal done where you're moving up to around 25, 26. And if the Pistons were to do that, obviously it's all hypothetical at this point, I think a guy like Maxime Reynaud would make a ton of sense. 7'1", 250-pound senior out of Stanford last year. 20.2 points per game, 10.6 rebounds per game on 47% shooting, 35% from 3 on 5.5 attempts per night, and 1.4 blocks a night. So I really like the fit with Maxime Reynaud. He makes a ton of sense. He does the things that Jalen Durant and Isaiah Stewart can't, like take a defender off of the bounce, stretch the floor, score at all 3 levels, operate out of the high post and the elbows. He's a really good passer, and he's just more of an offensive-minded big that kind of plays more similarly to a small forward or a power forward compared to Jalen Durant, who is, your traditional bruiser center. I like the fit with Maxime Reynaud, and especially considering the Pistons have, been open to the fact or been open to the idea of trying to get a stretch big to surround around Jalen Durant and Isaiah Stewart to test it out and see if it works. And rather than going out and getting a Naz Reid or a Jaren Jackson Jr., where you're going to have to sign a guy to a big deal or you're going to have to give up a ton of assets in a trade, the Pistons can take a low-risk, high-reward route and trade up in this draft a guy like Maxime Reynaud, who's got proven ability at the collegiate level, and hopefully he can translate into the next level and find a way to really complement this team, complement Jalen Durant and Isaiah Stewart really well. And you're not, forcing your hand at a 4-year deal with a guy who might not pan out in the long term. And you're going to have to give a big contract to them as well. So I like the option of having a guy on a rookie deal and using that as your proof of concept for a stretch 5 in this lineup. See if it works, and if it doesn't, it's at really no cost. So I like the idea of Maxime Reynaud on the Pistons. A little bit older, like I mentioned, 22 years old. He's the same age as Jalen Durant, but he's a little bit closer to his ceiling as an NBA player at 22 years old. So I like him to be able to come in and provide for this team right away, especially on the offensive end of the floor. Throughout this draft process, tomorrow I'll discuss more prospects that I like. And then obviously on Thursday's episode, I'll talk about whoever the Pistons end up drafting, and I'll break down their game. But moving on, let's talk about Isaiah Stewart real quick. This year, I think Isaiah Stewart was pretty solid overall. I think he had a very good year defensively, obviously. I think fans were a little bit disappointed with his decrease in offensive production, and I can understand why. He averaged 6 points per game this year, 5.5 rebounds, 1.7 assists, 1.4 blocks, which is the most of his career so far, but it was the least amount of minutes he's played. in an NBA season on average. 19.9 minutes per game compared to 30.9 in 2023. He shot very effectively from the field, his highest of his career so far at 56%. But what was interesting was he pretty much decided he was just done taking 3-point shots. In 2023, he shot 38% from three on 3.8 attempts per night. Last year, he shot 32% on just 0.7 attempts per night. So clearly, there was something, maybe it was a new front office, a new coaching staff, where they were not comfortable with him taking 3-point shots. And I think that might be one of the reasons why the Pistons have shown interest in trying to find a stretch big this offseason is they don't want Isaiah Stewart to have to be a big offensive threat. They want him to just be that defensive anchor off of the bench that can relieve Jalen Durant if, he gets into foul trouble or he has any injuries or whatnot. They want Isaiah Stewart to be able to come in and pride himself on the defensive end without being overwhelmed or trying to force his hand offensively. And I don't mind that strategy whatsoever. I thought that last year it looked like he definitely was more locked in defensively because he wasn't, relied on so much to score offensively. We don't need him to be an 11, 12 point per game scorer off of the bench at all. We have scoring off of this team's bench, with Ron Holland, with Malik Beasley, Dennis Schroeder. He just needs to be a guy that you can rely on if you're playing a team that has an elite center, if you're playing the 76ers, if you're playing the Denver Nuggets. Some teams like those where you have to have a guy like Isaiah Stewart because Jalen Durant, can't keep up for 32 minutes with some of these guys defensively. So it's I love the dynamic that they showed last year of having JD and Isaiah Stewart in the center rotation. But like I said earlier, if you draft a guy like Maxime Reynaud or you were to go out and get a guy like Brook Lopez, I think that I would allow Isaiah Stewart to really just hone in on the defensive end and give you 25 minutes per game where he's just coming off of the bench and, just getting scrappy and getting a little bit down and dirty. I like the energy that he brings when he does that. And again, offensively, we're not expecting much from him. So if he can come in and just be that defensive-minded beast that he was last year, I think that Pistons fans will be perfectly happy with that. And then moving on, I want to talk about just another stretch four option. I know I've talked about it a ton over the past couple of days, but I like the idea of adding another power forward / center who can kind of moonlight at one or the other. And a name I really like is PJ Washington. I think he's an incredible player. I've heard some talks around the league about PJ Washington. It makes sense for Dallas to get rid of him just because they do have a big log jam at their forward positions. Clearly, they're gonna take Cooper Flag on Wednesday, and then you got guys like Anthony Davis, Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively. You've got Najee Marshall, who played well for you last year. They've just got so much depth at the forward positions, and what they don't have depth is the guard position. Clearly, Spencer Dinwiddie and Dante Exum are not going to be your point guard rotation of next year. With Kyrie Irving being out for a majority of the year, I think it makes sense to do a sign and trade with a guy like Dennis Schroeder. You can get a guy who will help develop Cooper Flag, will be a good point guard for the first year of Cooper Flag, will allow you to stay competitive in a loaded Western Conference. He got it done last year. Dennis was very solid. Everywhere he went, every stop he made, he was an impact player. He's a much better option than Spencer Dinwiddie and Dante Exum, like I mentioned. And I truly believe that if the Pistons are trying to find a guy like PJ Washington who can stretch the floor, then it might have to be at the expense of someone like Dennis Schroeder, just because the Pistons do have a surplus of ball handling depth right now, especially with Jaden Ivey coming back, Marcus Sasser getting another year under his belt. I don't think the Pistons really want to get rid of Marcus Sasser, and I don't think they want to get rid of Dennis Schroeder either, but just with what both teams need, with what the Pistons need, with what the Mavericks need, it would make sense overall for both organizations to make that move. But then again, the Pistons will do whatever they feel necessary this offseason to make this team better. And if you see PJ Washington's 15 points per game and 38% from three, if you see that as an option for somebody who can really provide either bench scoring or starting scoring at the power forward position, then PJ Washington's a very, very good option for the Pistons. I talked about John Collins yesterday. Very similar players, but PJ Washington's going to be much cheaper than John Collins. The contract that he is on is cheaper, and then the contract that he will re-sign or extend with the Pistons would most likely be significantly less than John Collins. So I think they're both similar players. They're going to give you the same energy on the defensive end of the floor. They're not great defenders, but they're okay and they're serviceable. So I do think that if you want to look at a little bit of a cheaper option than John Collins or Naz Reid or somebody like that, PJ Washington's somebody who makes sense, and especially considering the sign and trade deal with the Mavericks would make sense for both sides. But moving on from that, I want to touch on the Kevin Durant to Houston trade. I'll just go over the trade overall real quickly with you guys. So the Phoenix Suns have agreed on a blockbuster trade, sending 15-time NBA All-Star Kevin Durant to the Houston Rockets for Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, the number 10 pick in this year's draft, and 5 second-round picks, sources told ESPN on Sunday. That was from Shams. He posted that a couple hours ago. And for me, this trade, I think, makes a ton of sense for both sides. I think it's a great package for the Suns. You get a young athletic guy in Jalen Green that you can potentially reroute. I don't know what that backcourt will look like with Devin Booker, but you can potentially reroute Jalen Green. And then you're getting the number 10 pick. And you need to capitalize on young talent right now because all you have is Ryan Dunn and Oso Ighodaro right now. So you get the number 10 pick, and then you also get Dillon Brooks, who is still very serviceable, very good 3-and-D player still in this league. Can provide great minutes off the bench or as a starter. I know they're not very deep at the small forward position right now in Phoenix. So I like the fit with Jalen Green in Phoenix. I don't know if that'll work with Devin Booker, but they'll cross that bridge when they come to it. But I like the fact that they got younger. They got 5 second-round picks. You can use those in future deals. You can draft players to try and add to your young core, which they desperately need to do. And then at the number 10 pick, it opens up a ton of possibilities. You can go after a guy like Derek Queen or Kaman Maluak. I think both those names make sense. You're trying to find your center for the future. One of those guys makes a ton of sense for Phoenix, where they're at in their current situation. And I mean, you just got rid of Kevin Durant. Right now, you're probably not considering contending at all in the Western Conference. So you might as well find a way to build that young core, build that depth, and compete in years down the road. And then for the Rockets, I think also it makes a ton of sense. Last year, we saw Jalen Green as a number 1 scoring option, just wasn't going to cut it in the playoffs. And you went out and you pretty much swapped KD for Jalen Green. Yeah, you gave up the number 10 pick, but how much value does that hold really right now for a Houston team that's trying to contend for a championship? Whoever they would have drafted at 10 probably would have gotten buried down in the bench, similar to what happened to Reed Shepherd last year. But for the Rockets, you avoided giving up Tari Eason, Jabari Smith, Reed Shepherd, Cam Whitmore, and you were able to still get Kevin Durant. I think that's a huge win for Houston. You had to give up Jalen Green, but where did you really see him on this team in the future? Where did he really fit? He's kind of a shot chucker, so I really like that they went out and got a smart veteran, savvy scorer like Kevin Durant who can try and lead them to a championship next year. And I truly believe that they're going to become instant contenders in the Western Conference because of the Kevin Durant addition. I love Amen Thompson, obviously. With being the twin of Asar Thompson, they're very similar players, and I love Asar Thompson's game. So I love Amen. I think Alperen Sengun's a very, very talented player, and adding KD alongside them. I mean, can you imagine what that playoff run might have looked like if you had KD instead of Jalen Green last year? Jalen Green was just awful throughout the playoffs, and KD has, always been known as a guy who shows up in the playoffs. So that could have been really interesting. But now we'll get to see that going into next year. And I think that's going to be really fun. And then obviously we'll just talk about it. Is Devin Booker available? Are the Phoenix Suns trying to blow it up? And short answer for me, no. I think they're going to try and roll with Jalen Green and Devin Booker at least for the next year, but they're not just going to say, oh, we have our point guard / shooting guard of the future in Jalen Green. It's time to move on from Devin Booker. That's just not going to happen. Matt Ishbia is too smart of an owner to do that. He's already made a ton of mistakes as the owner too, and I don't think he wants to make another one. I think that he just made a really good move, and I think that they're going to try and kind of work with what they have. If they end up rerouting Jalen Green down the road, I wouldn't be surprised by that, but I don't see Devin Booker being a guy that's going to be on the move this offseason. And even if the Pistons were to trade for D-Book, it wouldn't be this year or probably even next year. They're not in the same boat as Houston right now, where they absolutely have to make a blockbuster move to try and compete. The Pistons are a few years back from where Houston is, and maybe a few years down the line, you think, okay, we need a second scoring option next to Cade Cunningham really badly in order to compete. Then maybe you try and inquire about Devin Booker, but right now, it doesn't make sense for either side. And I just don't think that's going to be plausible for the Pistons because they would have to give up too much. I don't like that. I don't think they should. I think they should roll with what they have. But overall, I think it's a good trade for both the Rockets and the Suns. And I can't wait to watch the Rockets with a competent number one scoring option. They're going to be a lot of fun. Emeka Udoka is doing an excellent job over there. So shout out the Rockets. Shout out to what they're doing. Shout out the Suns for finally figuring out a way to finally realizing that they're not contending anymore and they're about to be in a rebuild. So good stuff from the NBA. I love a nice blockbuster trade. It's always so fun to see kind of teams shake things up and push for championships, because I'm hoping the Pistons will end up doing that in a couple of years. But that's all I've got for you guys today. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, comment, turn on post notifications, and follow me on Twitter at Kyle Garrison2 for more content covering all things Detroit sports. Let me know in the comments if the Pistons should move up in Wednesday's draft and who you might like to see them go after. If you like Isaiah Stewart as a long-term backup center option. And lastly, if you think PJ Washington is a good fit in Detroit. Also, give me your thoughts on the Kevin Durant trade as well and who you think won that trade overall. With that being said, thanks so much for tuning in. That's going to do it here for episode 5 of Pistons Daily, and I will catch you all next time.